Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, we need,
Ladies and gentlemen, if I can have your attention, please.
very much, the world needs you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Come on over, grab something to drink. There's water.
You want some?
There'll be alcohol afterwards. You have to earn it.
Please.
I have,
Grab some sugar. There's all sorts of good sugars
So I need to
and
speak.
chocolate with caffeine. Come on over. Come on up close. Everyone in the first row gets a prize. Just kidding. If you're in the back row, you have to do laps.
Thank you.
You have your glass of water.
Absolutely.
Yes, I went.
You're in the front row. You have to answer all the
have one?
questions I'm going to ask. All right. And if you want to grab a chair and move it, you're welcome to move the chairs. They're all cool. They're really nice.
Oh, I just want to get a pen.
There's
1 second.
3 places up front. A couple places around.
The light is quite.
Great.
The light is quite. I know.
Yeah.
Can't see.
We're being filmed, so this is a bit of a, yeah.
I can't watch you because the light is too strong.
Okay. So I'm going to sit down then. There, that's a little bit easier. Yeah, oof, boy. Okay, so welcome. We're at the Noy House. This is the ETH conversation on the future of higher education. You're in the right place. Yeah? All right, we're going to do the Zoom thing. We're all in the right place? You okay? All right, just checking. Great. So it is really a pleasure to welcome you here to this conversation with 3 amazing guests this evening. This is the second part of a conversation and dialogue, a workshop and dialogue we've had on the future of higher education. We just spent the past 2 hours thinking about what's driving change in higher education, and the participants, most of which are still here, some had to leave, kind of went through 60 drivers and reduced those down to 4 that they thought were at the moment some of the most important ones to think about. It was quite interesting to see what they chose, and I'll tell you at the end. So my name is Chris Lubkeman, and I have the privilege of being within the Office of the President and leading the Strategic Foresight Hub within his team. I have with me today on the stage Nicholas Dirks, Joanne Halpern, and my boss, Joël Mizot. That's a tough one. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourselves as you feel is relevant for our conversation on the future of higher education. So I'm going to start with you, Nick.
So I'm Nick Dirks. I am currently the president of the New York Academy of Sciences. Before that, I was chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley. And before that, I was here in New York at Columbia University, where I taught in the departments of anthropology and history, and was also the executive vice president and dean of the faculty of the arts and sciences. I spent a lot of my scholarly life writing about and doing research in India. And so that is part of my life. But most recently, the field work I've done has been in the halls of administration of 2 universities that are frequently in the news, then and now.
And
I wrote a book about it, about my field work in the University City of Intellect that came out last February.
no. And Nick did not pay me to show the book here at all. But it's a fantastic book, and we're going to talk about some of the things in here in just a little bit. And next to Nick, Joanne.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. So I'm Joanne Halpern. I am the director of the Hasso-Plattner Institute for Digital Engineering here in New York City. Hasse was one of the founders of SAP, so I sit in the SAP offices here in Hudson Yards. And before that, I was the founding director of the German Center for Research and Innovation. This was an initiative of Steinmeier. And since we're with a Swiss university here, actually the Germans got the idea from the Swiss. The Swiss created it, something called Swissnex. And the German Center for Research and Innovation, or Deutsches Wissenschafts- und Innovationshaus in German, was created on that model. And we were located here in the German consulate, or we still are. I'm not there anymore. And the idea is to enhance the visibility of German research and innovation in North America, and to support startups and many other things. So I did that for about 8.5 years. And now I'm running the Hasso-Plattner Institute. And before that, I spent a lot of my, and I also teach at NYU. I'm an adjunct professor of international education at New York University. And before this, running the German Center, I was working in Germany. I built built international partnerships of several German universities. And I'm a New Yorker, though. So I guess that's enough for now.
That's enough for now. We're going to come back to a couple other things you did mention in just a few minutes. Joël.
First, I want to thank both of you for being here and bringing your experience in the education system. So I'm the boss of Chris. And when I have some time, I'm also the president of ETH Zurich. So since 2019, and before that, I was the head of what I call the DOE lab of Switzerland. So I'm a physicist by training, and the place, it's called the Paul Scherrer Institute, where we have accelerators and different type of energy research. I very often say these 10 years that I spent as a director of the DOE lab of Switzerland was my training to become president of ETH. And I think it would have been difficult without that training. And probably we'll discuss that in a minute.
Yes, we will. We have leadership and what that means. So we're here to talk about the university of the future of higher education, but we can't really do that, in my mind, without doing the slingshot, which is looking back a little bit. And when we look back, Nick, this is one of the things that I've learned in your book, very interestingly, about the role of politics, political change in the past, and how that has actually given birth to the institution which we know and love. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you know, the problem asking a historian about the past is that we'll go on too long, so I'll just try to...
You got 3 minutes.
Yeah,
okay, here we go.
Give me a
I'll
time.
set the, hold on, I'll set the timer.
Yeah, set your watch.
Here we go, all right.
But I think what I focused on in my historical account, which is part of a book, which is first half memoir, second half kind of synoptic view of the university from its origins in Bologna and Paris and Oxford and Cambridge to its efflorescence after effectively Henry VIII abolished the monasteries, which created a kind of need, a space, a provocation for universities to become greater centers of intellectual life, or at least scholarly life in the sense in which it was going on, which then led to the idea across many British colonies, including the United States, that if you were going to have a place that would be somehow comparable to the mothership, you had to have colleges and universities. So you had Harvard, the first university in the US that was really set up as a kind of outpost of Cambridge, which is how Cambridge, Massachusetts was so named, but which, like Oxford and Cambridge, continued very much to be a small teaching college, largely focused on teaching basically a very small number of elite students, either to be ministers or to be lawyers and basically public figures. the university world grew in both Britain and the US in the 18th and 19th centuries. And of course, in the US, every not only new town needed to have a college or university, also every new state had to have one, which is why another date is 1862, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act, which effectively provided funding for every state to have a public university, which nevertheless we're still following the kind of UK and early US model, only to be disrupted in a major way by the fact that in Germany, because of William Humboldt and others, you had the rise of what we now call the research university, and a real focus and emphasis on the research function of a university in terms of both producing research and also training graduate students to do research. A third of the, I'm sorry, even a half of the people who went on to leadership positions in American colleges and universities in the US studied in Germany. And they brought back with them the idea of the research university from Germany, which then took off here. And the 20th century is a history, as you know, of the growth of the research university in the United States. It steadily, I'm sorry to say, displaced the German university in terms of its research profile, benefited in major ways both from the growth in expectations about the importance of a university education, but also then of the strategic importance of universities for war and military preparedness and national security. World War II and the role that science and university education played in the US victory in the war led to a provost from MIT by the name of Vannevar Bush writing a book called Science, the Endless Frontier, that became the charter for federal funding for research across universities. He set up basically the National Science Foundation, and universities took off in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and both the wealthy private universities and the flagship public universities. Fast forward, late 20th century, begin to be a series of funding crises in state funding for public universities, growing differentiation between and among private universities. In the 1980s and 90s, some universities gained huge resources through building their endowment from largely philanthropic sources, only to see a whole another set of private universities begin to fall by the wayside. University of Michigan has very hard times in the 1980s. I was there actually teaching at that point. University of California begins to have hard times in the 1990s. But by the time I went to Berkeley in 2012 to be chancellor, the state contribution to the overall budget, which was at that point $2.4 billion, was down to 12%. It had been just a decade before 35%, and back in the 60s and 70s, it had been more in the order of 70 to 80%. So now we're in a world in which those funding crises that got more and more difficult, and they were very difficult for me during my time at Berkeley, have been compounded by all the things you read about in the newspapers, and the fact that there's growing skepticism about the university, growing criticism of the university, a growing sense that it's harboring left-wing, disaffected students and training them how to be unpatriotic, controversies over everything from controversial speakers to student encampments lead increasingly to what I did in 2017, which was to step down from my role as leader of the university. Meanwhile, and this returns us to the things that you've been talking about, institutions like ETH, which I've had the good fortune to visit on several occasions because Berkeley is part of a research consortium with ETH, are places that are continuing to show how important universities are for all kinds of reasons. We see in places like China huge state investment in universities, increasingly the cutting edge research in areas like AI that you've been talking about. It's being done in Asia. And there are crises around university funding, not just in the US, but in the UK. And I understand potentially even in Switzerland, but we'll get to those subjects later. Anyway, that's as synoptic a version of the history of the university I have.
That was an impressive tour de force, Nick. And congratulations on keeping it to within 25 minutes. I think that was really good. I appreciate that. But it's also, I think, very illustrative, as you pointed out, of these transitions, these arcs. Like you said, Cal was at 80, 70, 60, 50, down to 12%, so it's really no longer a state university, it's in the competition, there's lots of implications on that, not just on the funding, but on the students, on the teaching, research. And also the importance, as you pointed out, of the early days of the nation building and how that had an impact on our psyche, with Lincoln saying every state should have a school. Right, very interesting. Now, Joe, I'd like to jump over to you, and then I'm going to ask Joanne at the end, because Switzerland, ETH was founded as a nation-building university. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's interesting in the context of where we're heading, because the nation's built. That's the question of kind of what's next. So how did it get there?
So in Switzerland, of course, we always refer to the foundation of Switzerland 1291, but actually, okay, there is a lot of legend behind all what happened. In Switzerland in 1848, there was a small civil war, religious war, and the Protestant won, and then the new constitution was made within very short time, within a year. 1847, and then 48, the constitution was made. And then one outcome of this was we want a national university. What Dirk commented was we had cantonal universities, so Basel, for example, was a very old university. Fribourg, my canton, was very old university, but we had no national university. And the interesting part is that there was competition. Everyone wanted this university, this national university. So at the end, Zurich won apparently, but the biggest contender was the canton of Vaud, where now the EPFL is located. 100 years later, the EPFL was. I can explain why it happens this way, because the losers created the cantonal polytechnical school. And which became a federal school 100 years later. So ETH was founded in 1855. And the other very interesting part is you mentioned Germany as a leader. You would think Zurich, the ETH Zurich, it was called the Polytechnique at the beginning, Polytechnicum, after the French model. So we oriented ourselves towards more what France had been doing, Napoleon and the Polytechnical School. Some parliamentarians were really fond of what was in France, happening in France, and transported that to Switzerland. And this is how ETH was created. Now, there was a very interesting debate. What should this national university do? Nobody could agree on what they should do, we should do, but they agreed on what we should not do. No law, no medicine, no social science and religion. So all the boring stuff, technical stuff were left, right? and which turned out to be actually one of the assets of ETH. I'm very happy that we don't have a medical school, as you know better. Now, ETH became a mission, a very clear mission. It was to modernize Switzerland, and this is where it relates to the politics. So Switzerland was a poor country at that time, farmers mainly, no electrification, no tunnels, roads, trains, and so they needed engineers. And this is how, why ETH was created. And there is an interesting anecdote. One guy called Escher, Alfred Escher, was very he had one vision. His vision was to build a tunnel through the Alps. And so this is the first Gotthard tunnel, and he built it. Unfortunately, he passed away just before it was finished. But since he needed engineers, so he was fighting to get ETH, which he did. He had financial issues, so he created a bank that became the Credit Suisse, unfortunately. Okay. So I hope it's only Credit Suisse that's going to disappear. And finally, he created an insurance that became, I think it's Swiss Re, no? So the same guy created these 4 amazing founding institutions in Switzerland. He was a politician in Zurich and a politician in Bern. All this at the same time. This is the time after 1848 when the law was still continuing to evolve and where everything was kind of possible. So you could make these kind of things. After that, it was regulated, and then it wouldn't be possible. What I want to say is that this mission to serve Switzerland and society in general has stayed up to now. And this is something that might be a bit different than other universities when we talk about how do we want to go in the future.
Yeah. Thanks for that, because I think this is very interesting, and also the nation-building aspect and its focus, because the focus, as you indicated, was on the beginning was on the engineering, the architecture, and the chemistry, which you needed.
There was no physics at the beginning. That hurts.
They got smart later, I guess. Maybe they knew better then. Who knows? But
maybe one thing, he mentioned the financial issues. I don't know. Do you want us to discuss that now, or because it's something I'm quite passionate about? So you know, Einstein said, when I'm going to die, I will go back to Switzerland, because there everything happens 20 years later. And of course, what US has seen with this privatization of universities, the example that you gave on Berkeley is exemplary. So majority public funding maybe 50 years ago, and now it's just a minority. It's exactly what I believe is happening in Switzerland now. Because we are, for 3/4 funded by the state of Switzerland, the nation of Switzerland, and we have a very special law that is one of the hardest spending law of worldwide. When the state increases the debt, it has to decrease the expenses. And you know, COVID, immigration, gas, energy issues, all this happened in the past 5 years. So the debt of Switzerland has increased proportionally. In absolute, it's still one of the lowest worldwide, measured to the BIP. Now they need to cut in the expenses. But the issue is 65% of the expenses of the Swiss Confederation are what we called protected, all social expenses and so on. So 35% is unprotected. Now guess who is in the 35%? Education, agriculture, the army, and the foreign affairs, so help to developing countries. So agriculture you can't touch. They are all over the place, and every Swiss has an uncle that is a farmer. I have 2. So military, they want to increase the budget because of the mess that's happening in Europe at the moment. And so you are left with cutting in the foreign affairs, developing countries, and education. And this is exactly what's happening. So we go the way US and UK and Canada is going, and we know where it goes.
okay, so with that as a springboard, you mentioned Humboldtian and our mission, and Joanna, I watched you were shaking your head quite a bit when you said Humboldtian, with this idea of the research in Germany being right at the front end of so many of these things. And one of the things that's interesting to me is when we bring a lot of these things down to the ground. Because on one hand, we have to think of it as an institution, but on the other hand, we have to think about their students, right? And Humboldt means we have research, we have teaching, we have the best of many worlds at the same time. And one of the things you've been doing is trying to bridge between different worlds, using design thinking and using some of the things you've been working on. Show us a bit about that. How do you see this bridging happening?
Well, thank you, Chris. First of all, since we've covered several hundred years of history, I'm not going to go into the history of design thinking, but I just want to give you an idea of some of you might not know what it is. And so design thinking has been around for many years, but under different names. But when it really came to the fore was at Stanford, where some professors were working on this design thinking. And Hasso actually offered, I think he basically said, this is the kind of thinking that helped me and my colleagues as well found SAP. I don't know if it was accepted as much by the leadership at the time, but when he put in, I think, about $30 million, I think it was accepted. And because all these post-its, people, this wasn't maybe necessarily seen as an intellectual endeavor, but this kind of thinking is critical. And a couple years later, Hasso-Plattner said, we need this in Europe. So the Hasso-Plattner Institute is really the hub of design thinking in Europe. We have coaching certificates, we have 3-day, we have all different kinds of options. And so when I came to Hasso-Plattner Institute, since we're in the history thing, I have to give a little history. When I came to Hasso-Plattner Institute in 2018, the person who was in charge at the time, Professor Meinl, said, Frau Halpern, you have to learn design thinking. I said, okay, fine. And I didn't really know about it at the time. And design thinking is a team-based method to come up with innovative solutions to complex problems. But some people don't call it a method. There's not one definition. Some people call it a method, some people call it a process, but it's also a mindset and a way of thinking. And I have a design thinking partner in crime here, Marianne, who's at the ETH Zurich. So we design thinkers, we know each other, not all of us, but we get along without even knowing each other. We're already friends, And why is this important for the university? There's so many parts of design thinking that align with university values. Of course, different universities have different values, different missions, but curiosity is a critical element. And how do we come up with innovative ideas? I mean, if we're not curious, and I'm going to give you a personal example, and I think this might, some of you might say, oh yeah. So for 50 years of my life, I accepted plastic, plastic wrap in German, the Germans in here say, Frischhaltefolie. It's like the plastic wrap or Glad wrap that goes on the cardboard roll, and then you have to tear it off with the serration, and you sometimes cut yourself, and then it kind of sticks to the roll in crazy ways, and then when you put it on top of fruit, it kind of sticks to itself. You all know this? Well, before I did design thinking, I just accepted that this is how it is. And then when I started doing design thinking, I started seeing my environment differently, including plastic wrap, and saying, this is really badly designed. How could this be designed better? The elevators, I work in Hudson Yards, multi-million-dollar building. The elevators, everybody comes to the elevators, and they have to go back to security and ask, how do you get to the elevator? How do you get upstairs? There's like a black screen. Because in design thinking, you actually have to go to the people you're designing for, and you want to empathize with them. So empathy is also a critical part of design thinking. And a lot of us in academia, from organizing orientation programs for new students, to setting up a lab, so in so many areas, in designing a building, we don't often test it in a way we can with users. And of course, you can't test a building, but you can make prototypes. And you find out, and we also have the idea, and another thing about design thinking is we try to create a psychologically safe space. This is so critical to learning. Those of us who are teachers, who teach. If people don't feel comfortable, they're not going to ask questions. They're not going to, speak in class. So design thinking has many qualities that we want to have in our universities. Also, fail early, fail often. Yes, failure, oh my gosh, failure is not always, is a little bit frowned upon. But we see in design thinking as failing as learning. And we also say fail fast, fail forward. So what does that mean? If you're prototyping, an MRI, let's say, because this was a real story where a man named Doug Dietz used design thinking to create an MRI for children, and his first prototypes were cardboard. Why? I'm going to ask you, why would you have first prototypes as cardboard?
It's easy to modify.
Yeah, easy, right? And you're getting feedback right away, and you're not using expensive materials because you can, you can make changes right away and very easily. And this is all part of design thinking. And we want to have that, and this experimentation is an important part of the university. And this is where I see, since we're talking about the future of higher education, this is a critical part of it. But another part of design thinking that I see in the future of higher education is we have multidisciplinary teams. Why? Different teams from different backgrounds, different perspectives. Different perspectives help lead to innovation. We also want to bring this up, since you guys talked a lot, I can talk a little bit. Right? Another thing is space. We pay a lot of attention to space in design thinking. We look at how space is designed. Universities now that are being created, Cornell Tech, when I was at Carnegie Mellon a couple of years ago, they also said that they're creating space where collisions occur, serendipitous collisions, because collisions, instead of silos and departments being in silos, by colliding, or not literally colliding, although that happens too, especially in New York, we are coming in contact with people of different backgrounds. And this is not only in the universities. I work in the SAP offices here in New York. SAP was designed for this as well. Of course, Hasso was involved in that, and for him, he understands that importance of collisions and of those side talks. Think about when your best ideas come to you. It's not always when you're sitting at your desk. It might be when you're in your shower, when you're running, when you're in nature. If you look at Google, if you look at the Google offices, you look at a lot of these innovative offices, you have pool tables, you have different spaces where people come together, not necessarily doing work, but come into and have different discussions with each other. And this is critical in the university too. And if you look at, since I read Nick's book as well, and he talks a lot about Berkeley, let's look at Jennifer Doudna, came up with CRISPR with Charpentier together, received the Nobel Prize. And her innovative, I think it's IGI, Innovative Genomics Institute. Thank you. I love I have Berkeley next to me here. Innovative Genomics Institute. If you think about that Innovative Genomics Institute at Berkeley, there is not just, there's biology, there's computer science. I mean, data science is critical now. You have ethics, because CRISPR, if you can now change the DNA, and that can affect future generations, but also you need to have consent of people. If those of you who read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, you know that her cancer cells were used without her consent. She didn't even know. I mean, these are very important issues. So you've got law and ethics, and there's so many different things, and this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary is a critical part of design thinking, and that's why I see this. That's why this is really, I see this as part of the future of higher ed.
I like that. Very good. So space, I want to thank you very much, John. I really like the spaces for serendipitous collision. When we think in the psychological safe space, and I want to, when we think about the past 5 years and the evolution of how we've been teaching, the evolution of society as well, with the expectation that we can work at home as a given. And sometimes our challenge is still getting our students to come back into class. So when we talk about this serendipitous collision, we have departments in universities who are so focused on publishing in a subjournal of a subdomain to get credit. How do you see this going forward? Nick, I want you to project forward with some of these trends and paint a picture for us.
Well, let me first just piggyback on what you were saying, because I think it's so critical to emphasize the importance of creating conditions under which the kind of collisions or interactions or serendipitous collaborations that design thinking advocates for take place in universities. Universities are old places, whatever their histories are, and that is to say, they follow a certain set of norms, certainly within the US context. And even progressive ideas that led, for example, to the founding of one of the campuses in the University of California at Santa Cruz, basically lasted only about 15 years before they reverted to the mean. And the mean is very powerful because you have professional organizations that organize the way faculty see themselves, where they have to be published in order to be promoted or hired in the first place, et cetera. And you, as a rational actor, will, as an individual faculty member, do your thing in your silo because that's how you advance. But what you were describing about disrupting that is something that I've been very committed to, partly because I was trained in a couple of different disciplines. I never quite knew what my discipline was. And that was a very liberating thing. So I've always been in at least 2 departments. And I could never talk about my department without then going on to specify it, whereas most faculty in the US do. And you know, the first time I was able to do something about this was at Columbia when we built a new science building. And we mandated that it was for chemists, biologists, physicists, and engineers, that, and each floor had 3 labs on it. It was designed, beautiful building by Rafael Moneo. It's on the corner of 118th and Broadway, if you are ever up there. But we mandated that that you couldn't be next to somebody from your own discipline. And the most extraordinary things have developed out of the research in that building because people are working together. But you know, what I found when I went to Berkeley, and we had this major financial crisis, I tried to suggest, let's not just waste the crisis, let's seize it as an opportunity. Let's think a little bit about different ways to organize the work that we do, both in research and in teaching. And we did a number of things that worked. Most importantly, creating a division of data science that was not a division, it was actually a division across the whole. And it cross-sected the entire university, and it became the fastest growing space for student interest and course taking of any new program in Berkeley's history, at the same time that it created extraordinary research opportunities. And before people were talking about the ethics of AI, people were actually doing the ethics of AI by virtue of working between and among different groups and the like. So I've seen this work, but I've also seen the resistance to it. And when we were trying to do some of these changes with a $150 million structural deficit that emerged just a year after I had arrived in Berkeley, the faculty were very reluctant. So, you know, it's not an easy thing to do. I quote in my book a lot from the first chancellor of UC Berkeley. He was also the president of the University of California system. Clark Kerr wrote this really classic book in the history of higher education in America called The Uses of the University, and I highly recommend it. But even he, in the 1960s, found that faculty didn't like change. So you have to actually think about it from the point of view of students and also from the point of view of how knowledge actually proceeds. And then, if you do the user experience, as it were, in that way, you begin to see the real advances are taking place on the edges. And you have to cultivate those edges. So as I think about the future, I think, sure, we have major challenges, certainly in the United States. Universities are not in good shape. We'll talk in a second about leaders of universities. I constantly get calls from newspapers across the US, from journalists saying, is the worst job in America being a university president? To which, of course, I say, probably not the worst job, but it's up there. It's certainly, it's not a long job anymore. But as I think about, which is a pity because you need to have real leaders now in these spaces. But as I think about the future, I think, let's think differently. And I actually was very influenced by the D School at Stanford. Let's think about it from the point of view of students. Students, one of the examples that was given by the D School as they designed a kind of parameters for a new university was students need to have on-ramps and off-ramps, but then on-ramps again. They don't all just start and finish in a 4-year cycle. They have different kinds of lives. In fact, more than half of the students in undergraduate programs in America today are what we call non-traditional students. Well, if that's the case, maybe we should think of them as traditional and the others as non-traditional. But if you do that, and you think about how you take advantage also of technological innovation, the fact that you can take certain kinds of courses with certain kinds of faculty who are not in your university at the same time that you're residing in a particular university campus. You think about the fact that the kinds of collaborations we can do now, both across universities and globally, unprecedented. As you think about the needs of the future in terms of how technology is infiltrating everything that we do, from business to science discovery, drug discovery, and basic research, you realize we have to change our structures. And I think we have to become much more of a networked university. Think about discrete pieces that we can connect, and think about how we would redesign a university to work for the actual students, the actual people producing real knowledge, and the needs of our society today.
I think it's great.
Can I add
Joanne, go
something?
ahead, and then Joelle, you're on the edge of your seat, I can tell.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted
Yeah,
to
go
add something to what Nick was saying, and that is, you know, in design thinking also we're looking at, we're designing for something we don't know about, so it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And this is going to be not design thinking, but you know, one of the things that some universities are already doing, but I think is important, is seeing our university. It's not a 4-year, and I think you were alluding to this. This isn't a 4-year or whatever year program. That can't we come back now as technology is changing at such a rapid rate, and we need to continually re-educate ourselves and learn. Is that university something that we can keep going back to, or do we go to others? I mean, network. We don't have to go to our own, and we can go all over the world. But that whole idea of networked universities and connecting with each other. But anyway, go ahead, Joel. I don't want to.
No, thank you so much for what you are saying. You know, my background, I've built machines, physics machines that were used by biologists, chemists, environmental scientists, and so on. So my world of interacting with different disciplines was always there. I'm not saying I understand biology, but some benefited from that. And I think there is an additional reason why I think we need even more than ever to accelerate this multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach. This is the pace at which we are hit by the crisis, and both the intensity and both the density of this crisis. As a president of ETH, I've known only crisis. I started in 19, right? And then it never stopped. And so we learned something positive from the Corona time, when everyone was sent home and allowed to go back only to work on Corona-related issues. From the 16 departments, we had contributions, including mathematics, to solve some of the pressing issues of, you know, our society. And not only Swiss, but worldwide. I mean, there are beautiful stories, like one respirator that was produced for the world in Ukraine. Can you imagine that? Before the war. So I've been there. I met Zelensky, for example, before the war. And all these stories has left some traces in the school. So I'm not that pessimistic. I think I see especially for the younger scientists, they want more of this. And so we created 3 years ago in the field of AI, an AI center, and Mena is here. She knows that better. She was part of the creation of this. Mena, can you raise your hand? And the idea is to have all the know-how that we have through the school in one center to allow cross-disciplined interactions. We do that with the students. That works quite well. So for example, first-year student can go into a competition. They have to build a team from different departments. One has to be the coordinator, one has to be the leader. So they learn also about soft skills. And this is a lot of fun to look at these competitions. Where we have an issue, I must say, is with what relates to the traditional way universities are working. If we want to promote tenure-track professors that are working at the interface between two disciplines, very often they fail. Because suddenly they are judged by 2 or 3 departments. And of course, it's never good enough for one department. And here, National Science Foundation, universities, we have still a long way to go to bring this to reality. And in the view of the urgency that I just described, and in the view of what's happening this is one of the worries that I have. We need to address these global challenges today and not in 10 years from now.
Yep.
And we need these people, as you said, at the interface between disciplines, because most of the time this is where it sparks. We need both. We need the super specialists also that allow to develop a new code or something like this, but we need to go in that direction. So we are working on this. It's still a hard way to go.
And it's not only the faculties, it's also the journals.
2 seconds, Joanne.
Right.
Joanne, I'll give you a word just to
Yeah, it's the entire academic.
The journals also
entire
don't, you know,
academic
it's
system.
hard for, if you're a chemist but you're multidisciplinary, then the journals often, where do you belong, you know, and
Yeah.
so the publishing is affected.
Now, it is now 6:30. We're supposed to
We
end.
started late.
Yeah.
But this is sort of a moment of Switzerland, and we don't have electoral colleges or anything in Switzerland. It's all direct democracy. So if you'll give us another 5-10 minutes, because we started a few minutes, are we up for that? Are we okay with that? If you feel the need to leave, you're welcome to leave. In Switzerland, we do that as well. But thank you for your
I think she has a
letting us go a little bit longer.
I think
Thank
she has a
you for that.
question.
I think there are questions.
So, it looks like you're going to.
And two questions. First is for President.
You want one or two?
And I came from the Ivy League University in America.
We weren't going to do questions. But.
What is your daily life? My president, University of Pennsylvania, I worked for her as a special advisor. And I myself was the vice president. But my concern is current American Ivy League University presidents, every day they care about is go out to raise money, build the buildings. Our campus need this building, that building. So our president's job is go out to raise money and to build the buildings. We have no money, much money for our faculty salary increase. We don't have enough money to support the poor students getting into university. So, and this is the current situation we face. Second thing.
So what's is it? Sorry, excuse me, ma'am.
And
What's the question? What was the question?
The question.
is
I just
the president ETH and she paid us. And
okay.
It's okay.
Okay, no, yeah.
yeah, another question is American University higher education funded by President Tom Jefferson. He told us university should not involve with the government. But now we involve so much with the government. And the government gave us so many orders. Now we have 4 Ivy League schools. We don't have a president. We only have an internal. They fire our presidents already. So how you think about this? And why you doing so successful? And we see your university and stand up immediately. So we want to learn from you. What are you doing? And how your government involved with higher education.
Okay.
Okay, this is, those are outstanding questions. So maybe first an anecdote. When I started in 19, the biggest newspaper in Switzerland, so NZZ, wrote, Meursault got the most difficult job in Switzerland. It was in 19, right? Before all the crisis and so on. And Dirk can comment that in Switzerland. So yes, it's a difficult job. It's, I would say, almost impossible job. And I'm a bit worried that nobody wants to do this job in the future. And that's a worry I'm sharing with you. When you see what happens in US, this is really dramatic. And if I'm not wrong, it's mainly women presidents that had to leave. I've seen in Switzerland something similar. We have a lot of new presidents, we call them rectors in Switzerland, rectors of universities, female, and they were attacked in the newspapers like crazy. I was
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Joel. It's a very good point, especially when thinking about the future of higher education, the future of the university, and the role it has to play in this polymorphic, so this very poly-crisis, poly-everything world. And I think that's a very good point. And how, I want to come to some wrapping up thoughts here now, because we've gone all over the place, and it's good. And I think we could probably stay
Well,
about
it's because the moderator was not
Yeah.
very,
You guys have made my
I will
life.
have to talk to him.
Yeah. I'm glad the bar is going to be open here in a few minutes, and I've earned it today. But in all seriousness, I would like all three of you, I'll start differently. An interesting quote is very often that pessimists are often right, but optimists get more done. Right? This is an interesting thing which Thomas Friedman said that I actually like. And we can be very pessimistic. And we've talked about leadership, how no one really wants that job. I don't want your job. I thought I used to want to be a president of universities. No way. Fundraising, challenges with politicians. There's so much that we can be pessimistic about. But optimists get more done. So when we look to the future of higher education, I would like all three of you to give me an optimistic picture of where we want to walk towards.
Well, I think if I'll start and we'll go this way.
It's open to the floor.
I'll just say a couple of things.
So that's good. Thanks, Nick. Go for it.
Yeah. I clearly have spent the time I have in universities because I have a lifelong love affair with the university. And when I talk about the challenges, whether for the universities themselves in terms of dealing with the kinds of challenges they face, or coping with the budgetary issues, or now coping with issues around leadership, which are very real. I talk about these challenges only because I believe it is critical that we find ways to solve them. And I feel that we need to find ways to solve them because without the university, I think we will be in very, very bad shape.
Yeah.
So that is a statement about what would really make me pessimistic. I feel optimistic as long as we have vibrant universities. And I do feel that even with the current challenges, and I alluded to some of this before in sort of exchange with you about the kind of future of design thinking here, one can take these challenges and say, okay, maybe they will provoke a certain level of change that could be harnessed under the best of circumstances to do precisely what we need, which is to create the opportunity for these institutions to not only survive, but to thrive, and in thriving, to bring together people from different parts of the university and across all the different sectors that come to the university, whether as students or ultimately whether as donors or corporations that are partnering or governments, to continue to realize that this is where the knowledge of the future is being created. This is where the knowledge of the past is being conveyed, but ultimately this is where all of the solutions that we require will ultimately emerge from. So I take the point about optimism.
Good, thank you. Joanne?
Okay, so one thing we didn't talk a lot about is internationalization of universities, and I think this is also important for the future. We do it, and what if you want to ask one person at a university what internationalization is, another, you're going to get two different answers. But part of internationalization is global collaboration in research, in teaching, in learning. But it's also about within the university inclusion from, I like to think of internationalization as a whole body. Most people think of it as like the trunk of, and I think of it as it goes out to the fingers and toes from the cafeteria. Do you have halal, kosher? What kind of foods do you have in the cafeteria? So that if you're teaching, that our faculty are getting trained not only in the newest technologies, but also in understand intercultural communication, and also getting our faculty, students, administrators into other countries so that we can empathize with each other better. And this is going to affect the world. This is why we do design thinking also. And other thing with design thinking related to that is working with the communities. And we're doing that already. We're working with our communities. But I think it needs to be even stronger and really finding out what people in our communities need. Not just like a lot of universities say, okay, we're going to have a lecture on this. But what about we find out what are the people that we're giving these lectures for, what do they want? Or we're going to have an alumni event. What do our alumni really want? And to go out there and find it. And so if we can incorporate that in the future of the university even more, that's my take on it.
That's great. Thanks, Joanne.
I will be short. I'm an optimist. Okay. I think you cannot be a president of a university if you are not an optimist.
Exactly.
Of any big institution or companies. I think also you need both types of persons in a team, and there must be a rule about this, because if you have only risk-taking optimists, then it doesn't go well.
Yeah.
If you have only back-looking, kind of risk-averse persons, it's not going well either. But the balance, and all my teams were always balanced this way. And so, of course, it creates a very interesting debate when we have to take decisions. But what I've seen through different situations is at the end, there is some kind of collective intelligence playing. Of course, there will be voices that don't agree, but this collective intelligence is so powerful. So I believe that's the way we can move forward, and that's why I'm an optimist. I just want to recall an anecdote that is well known in physics. Is when the Fermi Lab in Chicago, in Illinois, was created. There was a hearing at the Senate, And the director of this Fermilab, the new director, the first director, was asked by a politician, this accelerator that you want to build, what will it help us with our defense, so military? And he said, you know, this will have nothing, this will help you in no way with defense. It will only make this country worth defending. And if we can bring this kind of message again and again, and I think people need culture, need values. This is why we are here together in this society. So I'm an optimist.
Thank you, Joël. You know, for me, I literally wish I could keep talking with all three of you all night, and I can't because we need to draw this to a close now and the bar is open. But I think I want to share two things. First of all, I said we did the workshop earlier, and I wanted to share with you just the 4 themes which the group of 20 came up with as critical. And these are all cards which are in the card sets which are out by the door. If you'd like, there's 60 of these cards in
I
there.
thought it was chocolate.
Huh? No, I'm not joking.
Chocolate?
No, their cards are over there. I brought them over. I brought them in my luggage. Are you kidding? You think, you better take them. I'm not taking them back. Circularity was one. And we'll leave them up here. You can check it out. Polarization and all sorts of different manifestations came up. We talked about that a little bit. Deepening disparities. You talked about students and the different students' needs, identifying what they needed. And finally, artificial intelligence, which we didn't talk about at all yet today, about some of the methods and where that's heading with the future of higher education, but it's also something we should talk about. To me, I think we're at, I want to call a Robert Frost moment, where you got 2 paths diverging in a yellow wood. Those Americans in the room will probably know it, many others as well. Both equal, both untrodden. But here, to me, I think those 2 paths are sort of equal breakdown and breakthrough. It's very interesting for me when we look at the future of this Robert Frost moment. Are we going to be designing towards breakthrough or breakdown? And I think this is, for me, I have hope and optimism. And I'm glad that you all have chosen leadership, because we need good leaders, and you clearly, all of you are. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you for being here tonight. This is really fantastic. So I heard there's something pop in the back. That's perfect timing. And sincerely thank you all for being here. And I look forward to seeing you again. I'll just tell you, this is a really fantastic book. And so, and I all wish you a good evening. And now we have time to, an apéro and some food will be also served for us to hang out. All right? And you can ask them all the questions you want. They're not running away yet.